Hello, hello. God bless you. God bless you. Such a pleasure to be here today. I am Apostle Darlene Turner, and this is a very special broadcast for every woman. I know this is in honor of International Widows Day, and of course, who in the world wants to be a widow? Who wants to talk about this subject matter? But we're really in a time and particularly a space where we do need to talk about several things that I just want to share with you very briefly and very quickly, because it's an issue that unfortunately, because widowhood affects 70% of married women, and we know that death, of course, is something that's inevitable and it's something we don't want to talk about. But the reality is, one thing that I've discovered in my widowhood journey is that there are a lot of things that we really should have talked about, really should have planned for, that I wish that I had the cognitive ability and the discussions to address and to prepare for what is inevitable. Now, listen, I know, I take it from me. I've never wanted to have the death discussions, but really what I'm going to talk about today is not really about death. It's about life and living and making sure that we are creating a better life for those who have experienced one of the most devastating things that can happen in life. But it's also for those of us who, unfortunately, especially with the surgence of COVID-19 and all of these other different things, that is something that we really need to face. And I'm going to show you why we need to face it, because, us not facing it doesn't keep these events from happening. And I can tell you that if we're going to deal with the death of a spouse, and particularly because our statistics let us know that 70% of married women are going to face this very thing, then it is better, trust me, to be prepared and to have a plan and have a strategy than to wait for that situation. Because I want to show you very quickly and very briefly as possible what's going on with those who are widows. Okay, so first off, helping to define the life of widows. Those of us who lose our husbands that live in America are actually better off than most people around the world. Okay, we're more blessed than most people. Some of you may not realize there are 258 million widows worldwide. How about that's a whole lot of widows? But almost half of them live in extreme poverty, and many of them are subject to cruel violence. Sherry Blair, who's the wife of the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, has summed up a wife's bereavement this way by saying, for many women, becoming a widow does not just mean the heartache of losing a husband, but for most widows, it's often also losing everything. Do you understand? So not only do they lose their lover, their friend, their soulmate, they lose their life and their lives, what their life has been built around, but they also lose everything else. So to combine the loss of the soulmate, you can only imagine what it is to also then suffer financially, emotionally, socially, and spiritually, which causes a lot of overwhelming feelings and overwhelming situations. Today, there are 13.6 million widows in America. And guess what? And this was pre-COVID-19 statistics. about 700,000 women become a widow in the United States every year. And the average for women to survive their spouses is about 14 years. Okay. Some other facts about the widow. Most of us are familiar with the Holmes Race Stress Inventory, which categorizes the potentially negative effect of life events on a scale of 1 to 100. Number 2 on that scale, with a mean value of 73, is divorce. And the death of a spouse is at the top of the list. Okay, so the death of a spouse is considered the number one most stressful event in the life of a person. I want every one of you who knows a widow or a widower to understand that that is considered the most stressful act that can happen in a person's life. Experts agree that grief and heartache and shock dominate the first 3 months after a spouse's death, and deeply felt sadness over the loss of a life partner will negatively affect the well-being of a widow or a widower all of their lives. As a matter of fact, there is what is called a widowhood effect. And according to a 2013 study in the Journal of Public Health, based on over 12,000 participants who were followed for 10 years, surviving spouses have a 66% increased chance of dying within the first 3 months after their partner's death. And in fact, we see this a lot, particularly with elderly couples that were married for years, where the one spouse will leave right after their spouse dies. And then sometimes they even go together and within hours of one passing away. According to Social Security Administration, the rate of poverty among elderly widows is even greater than the 50%. It's 3 to 4 times higher than the married peers. In 2016, 2/3 of Americans over 65 living in poverty were women. So I want the women to realize that the failure to talk about the things that will help you in widowhood, that unfortunately we know death is a definite event, right? That will happen. And for 75% of us, we will bury our spouses. And along with that comes poverty. Along with that, generally reacts in a 37% decline, at least in income. For some whose spouses were the full breadwinners, they have a total decline in their income. Okay, let me tell you about a recent case that was brought to me. I got a call because a pretty wealthy or well-off family, I should say, the spouse had been sick for 2 years. And so and she was a stay-at-home mother. And so they were well off and had a great life. Her husband was sick and they had savings, but for 2 years, he had been ill, so they were living. So of course he wasn't able to work and bring in the money as he had been able to do. And so they had savings and lived off of that savings for 2 years. And so it, of course, drained their savings and what they had. She had been a stay-home mom, and now their kids were, I think their oldest, I don't know how old their kids are, but they're older. She's in her mid to late 40s. And he was, I think, a little older than her. He passes away. And so now she has no income. And guess what? And this is what we're going to talk about. This is why I am called to bring awareness to this. And so she passes away, but they have no small children. Their children are older. And the way things are set up in our government, which is why I'm bringing this to light, that there are very little provisions for widows. And so with her husband passing away and her not being at least 60 years old, without having any young children, guess what? She can get no assistance. So basically, we do not have governmental assistance. We do not have a whole lot of awareness in our communities or even in our churches about the plight of the widow. And so this is just one case of very many cases where upstanding citizens, like this woman's husband, passes away and has given probably millions to the Social Security system, but the Social Security system doesn't allow for their spouse or for their children to be able to touch that money right now under the current legal system, unless that spouse has young children and is 60 years old. So you know what happens? So then that total household is devastated, and she would have to wait 15 years in order to get any kind of relief from the government. There are no other real entities that help, except there may be some private entities, but there's nothing that's prevalent in our society that helps widows. So guess what? In addition to having had all of that stress in taking care of her husband, and in the 2 years of being a caregiver, some of you know what that's like, but then to have to bury her spouse, and then wait a minute, to have been a stay-at-home mom who now does not have the skills to go right into most things in our society today that would have to go back to school and get her skill level up, and to have to deal with all of that, in addition to just having her life totally changed and totally flipped, and flipped apart. Can you imagine the stress of that? And now you lose your house. Now, not only did you lose your husband, you lost your house, you're losing your stability. You can't even grieve because there's no help, there's no assistance. And even the churches are not really in tune to what's going on with widows, okay? Which I'm gonna show you a little bit later. So this is what this is all about. This is what the National Widows Association is about. It's about bringing awareness to every individual, every family. Now listen, I just want to encourage you to share this broadcast with on your page with a widow. If you're a pastor, if you're a leader, I want you to just begin to be sensitive to the plight of the widow. There's actually so many things the Bible says about the widow and the poor. And of course, like most of us, I didn't get very concerned about it until it happened to me. And unfortunately, that's really a lot of our human nature, isn't it? That things become real clear when things happen to us, right? And so I have gotten a charge from God to be a voice for the widows and to create awareness about the plight of the widow. So that's what this is about. But again, it still involves you. So I pray you don't click off and go away, because if you know a widow, if you love a widow, if there's a widow in your family, I'm talking to you. If you have a friend that's a widow, I want to bring to light some things that maybe you didn't think about, maybe you didn't pay attention to. Okay, so I want you to share a couple of things with you, all right, about this. Okay, so I'm looking to pull this up. Here we go.